Did now.
Cool. I just
Thank
didn't
you.
see it. Hi,
Totally
everybody.
spaced.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be back. I've been gone for about a month. I'm glad you're here. I will rely on your questions. That will make it much more interesting than me just chatting and talking about things. I do have things we can talk about if we need to. So, but please pipe in. Did you ask what the CCS was after my name?
Yeah, I don't know what that one is.
That is a certified clinical sexologist. So
Thank you.
it's just everything sex. So anyway, yes, I work in Mesa. I work with a lot of betrayed partners and people who have problematic sexual behaviors. So a lot of my paradigm comes from there. That doesn't mean prodependence is really for any relationship. As I dig further and further into it, it's a way to understand our attachments to other people, and that when people struggle and we struggle because they're struggling, that's not pathological. That's not a disease. It's not a disease. It's not a disorder. It's because we love people and we're meant to be connected and bonded. So I love prodependence for that way. It's especially relevant for addiction because oftentimes partners and loved ones have historically taken some blame for their own stuff getting in the way, them being addicted to the person. And that is not a prodependent way that we look at things. So happy to answer questions and get started.
Okay, cool. We have a couple questions in already. So this first one says, I'm about to leave my home, my marriage of 20 years. Our communication has ground to a halt. I've been told if I don't like it here, get out. How much do I tell people that I'm leaving? Should I tell my neighbors, my family, etc.? And probably the question means how much do I tell about why I'm leaving?
Right, how much information?
Yeah.
First of all, I'm sorry to hear 20 years is a big investment of time in a relationship. So I'm sorry to hear it's come to that, but I also understand that sometimes that's a necessary step when maybe we've tried everything we can try or done everything we can do and still find ourselves in a position of not being able to sustain the relationship. As far as information, what you tell people, I think is completely 100% your choice. I think people are sometimes curious. If they're people that truly care, they're curious because they care and they want to support. But I think sometimes that pressure to tell people why or what's been going on or justify why I'm leaving or why they're leaving is something that you don't have to give into. I think you can just say it didn't work out. We're in a tough spot. And I think this kind of speaks to relationships too. You know, how safe are these people? You know, maybe there's one neighbor you don't mind telling or friend, you don't mind giving a little more information. And then there may be somebody else who you do. So I think Brene Brown says it perfectly. People earn the right to hear our story by how safe they are and how they show up in life and how they show up in that relationship, if it's reciprocal or if it's a one-way street. So I think I would look at each one of those relationships and decide what I want to say and to who, and to put that power in my own hands.
Yeah, and I would just add that whatever you choose to tell people, this is not a good chance to be vindictive and get even. You know, that's not what this is about. That's counterproductive. Like, Kim, do you see people doing that and regretting it later?
Oh, big time. Big time. I always say if it's a good idea today, it's a good idea tomorrow. So sometimes when we feel those urges to say things or do things or act on a thought or a feeling, it's okay to hit the brakes and kind of reassess like where I am and what's going on. A neighbor or friend could just catch you in a very vulnerable moment and you're just like, what, you know? So I always say, okay, if this is something I feel super inclined to say or do, it's okay to give myself a breath, to hit the brakes and give myself a day, a two, a month, however much time. If it's the right decision, it's always the right decision. So.
Yeah, stay off of social media with it, because that lives forever. You know, if you call him an SOB on social media, that will live forever. And
Well,
it's just nothing you can do. Your kids will read it, and your mom will read it, and his boss will read it. And you may want him to stay employed so he can help with childcare or whatever. So,
Sometimes when you're in crisis, it's just a lot like addiction. When we're in the part of our brain that's kind of either like in trauma or in a, and being in a relationship for a long time and it ending can be a pretty traumatic event, even if it's the right decision. So being in that part of our brain, sometimes we're not thinking forward or even backwards. We're just reacting in the moment. So we call that limbic, the limbic part of our brain. And so I think sometimes we might make decisions that we will regret later. I might put information out there to somebody or to someone that, my kids could hear about later, or other friends. Or so, like I said, find your safe people, find your tribe, as I say, talk to them, and everyone else can just bite it until you're ready to talk about it. So, or if ever.
yeah, we've got a couple more questions in, but I want to ask one more follow-up about this one, Kim. A lot of times somebody decides to leave the relationship, but they hopefully realize that they can still do work around how they do relationships. Can you explain the value of still being on this webinar today, even though the decision has been made that you're out?
I think that's such a good question, Scott. Thank you for bringing it up. There is somewhat of a temptation sometimes to think, well, if I get rid of the relationship or this particular person and their issues, I'm good. And certainly that does relieve pressure and a lot of conflict or other things that could be going on, but that doesn't always fix all of the hurt that went on inside of that, whether it's betrayal, whether it's lies, deceit, conflict, unhealthy conflict. There's all of that does have an impact on a partner, a huge impact on a partner. So I think what we wouldn't want to do is drag baggage from one relationship to another or into our family life or to our work life. So I think it's so relevant to be continue to work through the injuries and the wounds that are caused that happen inside these relationships, so that you make decisions in the future from a very clear and grounded place. And it won't be like that if I just kind of, sometimes it's the temptation is just to like, I see nothing, hear nothing, they're gone, I'm fine. But what will happen is it will rear its ugly head at the most inopportune times when I met somebody new and I want to connect with them, and all of a sudden I've got all this stuff coming and hitting me in the back of the head from past experience. So I think our healing is our own responsibility, even though I may not have caused my own injury. The healing's still ours to bear. It's a good question.
Yeah, Michelle Mays, who's a therapist on the East Coast, who I work with sometimes, she talks about how she was a betrayed partner of a sex addict, and she talked about when she decided to leave, she earned the right. She earned the right to approach relationships differently, and she knew she had to do some work if she wanted to do that. And I love the way she phrases that. I earned this. This didn't get thrown at, I earned this. I have the gumption to say, okay, I'm done. I can't live with this anymore. And I want to do things differently. So now I need to figure out what I want to do. What's important to me. I earned the right to be my own person and to make my own decisions and to move forward in a way that's healthier for me. And I love that. And, and I think that's a lot of what prodependence is. It's whether you stay in the relationship or not, you earn the right to do it better. Just for having walked through the pain, and, you earn the right to come out the other side and to be a better person. So I'm really glad you're here.
I love that. Yes. And that goes right along with Bernays' idea along this question, which she says all the time, people earn the right to our truth. They earn the right to know by how they show up. And I think it's such a powerful concept. I think, especially when you've been through betrayal or difficulty, sometimes, that sense of trust has been so injured that you don't know who's safe and who's not. And you absolutely have the right to take your time to figure that out. And maybe, I didn't have to think about that before, but that's one of the gifts or bless or I don't know, maybe the struggle of going through something like this is now the things can happen that I didn't think could, and I can take the time, and I have earned the right to take the time to figure that out. I love that.
Okay, so let's hop on to the next question. Everybody, this is straight up Q&A today, so ask us questions, anything to do with addiction, recovery, relationships, sex addiction. Kim is qualified to answer, and whether I'm qualified or not, I'll pipe in. So next question here. It has been 4 months since D-Day. For those of you who don't know what D-Day is, that means initial discovery, usually. I'm participating in many betrayed partner groups, but I seem to be the only one in a same-sex female relationship. I know that addiction presents in much the same way for a lesbian couple, but I am really interested in some specific resources. Do any exist? I should add that she has only acted out with men, and that makes things harder and more confusing for me. The betrayed partner is participating in groups, as is the cheating partner.
Thank you for the question, and I am so proud of you for finding the groups and trying to adjust to your situation, because sometimes it's not something that the resources are as available. So I just want to acknowledge that, but there are resources, and maybe Scott, you can help me with that too.
I'm digging one up right now.
Awesome, thank you. I'm really glad that your partner is also in doing some work and figuring things out. 4 months is really soon, so I'm sure you're still sort of reeling and still trying to figure out, what's happened and what happened to your world, and why it's all falling. It feels like it's all falling apart. And I guess I just want to validate that pain of that. Also, I think finding the resources are going to be really important, so your partner can find, people who will understand your situation, her situation, and your situation as the partner, and feeling betrayed in that relationship will be very much like other partners, any partner in any type of relationship that experience betrayal. From a prodependent perspective, I guess if we want to go there, I think, again, the validation that you care about somebody, you love somebody, you commit to somebody, and they start to fail in some way, or they betray, or they go outside of that relationship, and it is going to cause excruciating pain for the partner. And that pain is not, that pain would be typical. It would be expected, because we are built for pair bonding. We're built for connection. We're built for attachment. We're built to be able to rely on people, or we wouldn't be here with other people. I think that's one of the big challenges of the situation we're in with COVID, right? The very thing we need, we're not able to get right now, and it even complicates it even further. So obviously, the resources you found here on sex and relationship are amazing. I would find also a therapist who can help you sort through the aftermath and your pain and your trauma, and figure out how to help give you the tools you need to get through that. So you can, it's going to be some time for your partner to decide, what she's going to do, and if she wants to, rebuild the relationship, take care of the things she needs to take care of to be healthy, and to be healthy inside the relationship. Do you have any resources there, Scott?
Yeah, I just popped a couple resources into the chat feature. One of them is a book called Lesbian Love Addiction by Dr. Lauren Costine. And she kind of covers love and sex addiction. So whether it's love addiction or sex addiction or both, women tend to identify more with the label of love addiction than sex addiction, in my experience, even when it looks exactly the same. And then I also popped Lauren's website on there, drlaurencostine.com. This is her thing, and I think she has blogs on her website. There's some, and I'm sure she would, if you emailed her, she would give you somebody in your area. She's in LA, I don't know where you are. But there is at least one person who that is her specialty, and she's super nice. She's really cool. I also wanted to note that, a couple things about sex addiction kind of in a general way. Often, you know, we get, Tammy Verhelst and I, we get questions emailed to us all the time. And one of the most common questions is from women in a heterosexual relationship, and their husband or boyfriend or whatever is acting out with men. And they don't know what to make of that. Is there something wrong with me? No, there's nothing wrong with you. He is doing this either as part of his addiction or because there's a bisexual attraction or whatever. But, my behavior is not Kim's fault, ever. What I choose to do is what I choose to do. And Kim, not that we're in a relationship together, but other than friends, but if we were, my behavior would have nothing to do with Kim. I mean, it wouldn't reflect on her, even though it might feel that way to her. So don't take it on. Do you want to comment on that?
I was going to say, yeah. And also, I want to acknowledge it's another layer of pain, I think, because when your partner acts out with, in this case with a man, it's like, it's another layer of hurt because I'm not that. And it's the same thing when I see, when heterosexual couples and the man or woman goes, out and acts out with same sex, it feels ultra confusing to the, and another deeper layer of betrayal. Not that we ever should or compete with any of that, but it feels like, gosh, what does that say about me? So what Scott says is super relevant. It doesn't say anything. It's probably part of the intensity or the risk taking or, built into the addictive or compulsive process. And also, like Scott says, a good therapist can help you guys kind of sort through that and figure that out for both you and your partner. Because I'd have questions like, I'd want to know, is this a path you're taking simply because of your addiction, or is this a path, is this some type of retaliatory thing? I don't know, but it's something that you and she will want to figure out.
And the other thing I wanted to add is about sort of LGBTQ, whatever, however many letters you want to tack onto that. Actions and relationships in general. Men tend to be very fixed in our sexual orientation. Women tend to be much more fluid. There's a research that shows that men are attracted to body parts and sexual acts. Straight men are attracted to female body parts and acts with women. Gay men are attracted to male body parts. Bisexual men are attracted to both, but it's body parts and sex acts. Women tend to be much more attracted to pornographic imagery or erotic imagery that has an element of relationship to it. And it doesn't matter the gender of the people involved. Women get turned on by feelings of connection and feelings of being wanted and appreciated. And, I think a lot of times when women act out, that's probably why they self-identify more with love addiction. And I'm just kind of riffing here, but a woman is always more likely to self-identify as a love addict than a sex addict. And I think that's why, because the important thing for a female is a sense of being wanted and appreciated and connected, whereas men, it's a whole different animal, usually. Not always, but usually.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true.
I may have muddied the waters, but I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, obviously there's stereotyping in that, but I do think, I think even whether you're in a homosexual relationship, a heterosexual relationship, however that looks, generally we can say it looks a little different for females than males in a general form. Not everybody all the time, but I do see that it does feel a little more fluid. And the thing that pulls me towards one thing or another tends to be more emotionally connected. And I just think, that has to do a lot with being an emotional creature. We all are, men are too, but not necessarily always aware or tapped into that as easily. So.
And I think this tendency can make it being betrayed more painful for a woman than for a man, because that connection is so much more important usually for a woman than a man. Usually, generalizing, yeah. Please don't hate. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and stick with it. Stick with it. Keep coming back. Go to the drop-in groups as well, because you'll find other partners who will relate, and probably some in similar situations. This is a little more question answer, but those you can share more and open up more and connect better.
And I really like that you're looking for some same-sex resources for females, and you know, check out the stuff I put in the chat feature for you. I think you'll find it helpful.
Awesome.
So ask us questions. As we said, this is a Q&A. This next two, it looks like they go together.
Okay.
How important is a full disclosure with the polygraph test? And what is the benefit of doing a full disclosure or an official disclosure? Great question.
I think I'm going to switch the order. Going to do what's the benefit of doing an official disclosure first. I think formal or official disclosures are super important for several reasons, but primarily for the person disclosing the behavior, the addict or compulsive person, it helps with accountability. It also helps them come into full reality of the gravity of their decisions on themselves, on the relationship. It takes things out of hiding. So it is just a really cleansing, kind of cleans your side of the street, for lack of a better way of saying that, for the addict or the compulsive person. For the partner, sometimes the partners, it's hard as a partner, it's hard to hear all that information. And I get that a lot. They'll say, I don't want to go back there, or it's been 6 months, or, you know, I don't want to know all that. But I think in order to truly be in a relationship in a real and honest way, with healthy attachment, there really needs to be complete honesty. Doesn't mean you have to know graphic details that are super activating and, you know, distressing, but who, what, when, where, how much, when did it start, you know, those kind of things I think are really important for the partner to know, so he or she can make a grounded decision about, are these risks I'm willing to continue to take? And I actually think the full disclosures, when done right with a therapist, and when I say therapist, like a therapist for the addict and a therapist for the partner, and they're both present, and it's very well planned out, and we're very clear about the information that is helpful, that's going to be healthy for both people. Those can be some of the most amazing therapy sessions. Hard, they take a little longer. Ours are a minimum of 2 hours usually. But really it kind of cleans the street and resets that couple about the relationship, and the partner, if he or she's been like ignoring details, it gives them all the details that they need to know, within reason, obviously, so it's not crazy. But polygraph, I think, is I've developed over my many years doing this. In the beginning, I would be like, nah, I don't know. You know, you can kind of get a gut feeling if they're being honest or not. But I have totally done a 180. I think polygraphs are super important. I recommend them in almost, I would say, every case that I work with. Again, I think, and we try and do the polygraph directly, like very soon after the full disclosure, to confirm the truthfulness of the disclosure, not to catch somebody in a lie. But so this person's just sat there and given me all this information about their life and their history and all the things that they've done. And the polygraph just gives me that extra, for both the addict and the partner, that gives that little extra confirmation. And I also recommend what we call maintenance polygraphs for the first, depending on the gravity of acting out, but usually for anyone, I have them do at least maintenance for at least a year or two, every 6 months, every 3 months, whatever's needed. And those are very short. The first polygraph is long. It's a long interview with only 3 or 4 questions. The more questions you have, the less relevant the polygraph will be. So the interview is super long and specific, and then basically the polygrapher asks the person that he or she is interviewing, were you honest in everything? Was there anything you didn't tell in the interview? Blah, blah, blah. So I'm a believer Polygraphs, also just on a secondary note, polygraphers need to be very experienced in infidelity and this issue. They need to have a lot of experience. Not just any polygrapher does this particular type of interview. And as well, polygraphers who do this will not give the results to the partner or the addict. It will go to a therapist who will read through that information and then give that information to the addict. If they were dishonest in some way, they work through that, figure out where the dishonesty was and come clean with it. And then the addict's therapist will then talk to the partner's therapist and give that information to everybody. But the actual report itself, because the questions could be pretty activating and it's just a lot more information sometimes than people even need, it goes to a therapist. That's probably more information than y'all wanted, but there you
go. Those two questions actually came from two different people. So there's a
good.
lot of interest in disclosure today.
I would say too, Scott, as a follow-up, don't be afraid of, I think most people would have anxiety about a polygraph. I would have anxiety about a polygraph. I think it's nerve-wracking to think about sitting there and somebody testing, but experienced polygraphers that do this are there to help heal the relationship and to give the information in a non-biased way. And so I would say don't fear it. I think it can be, I've had addicts who now the partner doesn't want the polygraph anymore, but they like it. It keeps them accountable. And they're like, gosh, I just know I've got my maintenance polygraph in 3 months. And if I ever got some weird idea in my head, that helps keeps me honest and it keeps me in recovery. So they use it as a tool.
Yeah, as an addict, I want a polygraph. I want it immediately after disclosure, so you know that I told you the truth, and I want the maintenance so that you know I'm staying on the path. I think it really helps. The one thing I want to do if I want to stay with you is I want to rebuild trust. So anything that's going to help me rebuild trust, and that really is what disclosure is. I'm telling you everything so that we can start from ground zero and you can slowly, hopefully, begin to trust me again as I continue to be honest as we move forward. And by the way, knowing there's a disclosure the day after I do the disclosure with you, or that there's a polygraph that next day, I'm going to do my damnedest to get everything out. So it's out there, so I can pass that polygraph and say, yes, I'm really being honest now. I think it's really important. Anything to help rebuild trust in a relationship, I'm a big fan of. And I know not every therapist loves the polygraph, but I'm a big fan of the polygraph.
I am too. I like I said, I've evolved that way over the years after watching and understanding addiction even more. Part of addiction is lying. The biggest part of addiction is deception and lies to somebody else. Otherwise, that person would be okay with me acting out in certain ways. So if I'm an addict, I'm not going to, out myself if I want to keep my addiction going. So, the polygraph is just useful that way to stop that cycle of self-deception and then other deception. And for the partner, it's another tool. It's another way I can say, okay, because I want to believe, most partners do want to believe, but usually partners who have been with a sex addict for a long time have been lied to and deceived a lot. So, words are pretty cheap. They become pretty cheap over time. And I think, like I said, a polygraph with a polygrapher that's super experienced, that knows how to ask the questions. And I have two that I work with that are fantastic. One's actually a social worker and so has that skill and knows how to interview. But then I have one ex-FBI guy that does it, and he is so respectful and so good. And so nothing to fear, and it can't hurt. I always say that. How's it going to hurt?
Yeah.
I mean, if you have been hurt and betrayed, getting a polygraph is not, if he or she's been honest in that disclosure, polygraph shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't.
Yeah, I put in the chat feature a link to Amazon for a book called Courageous Love, which is not out yet, unfortunately. It's supposed to be, but COVID-19 backed up publication. It's currently scheduled to come out May 26th. I I got an advanced look at it. It's excellent. It walks couples and therapists through the step-by-step process of disclosure and what the pitfalls are and what the benefits are, and how, and highly recommended for anybody who's doing disclosure, but it's not out yet. Sorry. But there is, disclosure is not an event. It's a process. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Can you talk a little bit about the preparation? Like, I'm going to have my therapist, you're going to have your therapist. What are they doing with us before, during, and after the event part of the disclosure?
Very good. Yes, absolutely. I think number one, I want to validate that the need for disclosure is immediate for most people, for most partners. I don't want to wait till tomorrow or the next day so you can spend more lies and cheat on me more or whatever. But one thing that we have to balance is the individual's ability to be honest where they are and they may say they want to be honest, but they're still not there yet. So it usually, our policy where I am is we do a disclosure absolutely as soon as we feel clinically that the addict is ready to be fully transparent. And it's not going to be one of those situations where they tell part truths, half truths, and there's going to be, more disclosure in a month or whatever. This is one of the reasons why I like the polygraph as well, is it kind of helps encourage the addict to be completely forthcoming about everything. So sometimes it can be upsetting for a partner if we say, look, we need to give it a few weeks. We're working hard to figure out, because addicts don't always remember everything either. That's one thing that I've learned in really serious acting out behavior. Sometimes details get lost. I'm really limbic. I'm in that part of my brain that's not higher thinking. It's acting, reacting. And so it sometimes takes a period of some sobriety for that brain to move into the frontal part that remembers, where our memories are, where our logic is. Until I can get there, full disclosure it would cause more damage than be helpful if I do it prematurely. So be patient with that process. Secondarily, to answer the other part of the question, would be, I believe firmly that in these type of situations where we're dealing with addiction, that the addict needs their own therapist and the partner needs their own therapist. That rarely, if ever, should be the same person. Because I don't care how smart of a therapist you are, there's a lot of really good ones out there. Your job's to advocate for your client. And if you're trying to advocate for two people in an adversary relationship, even if it's temporary, even if they reconcile and everything turns out fine, I don't know any therapists that can do that perfectly. So you need two therapists, preferably therapists who are willing to coordinate with each other. Sometimes I do that in-house. So a therapist in my office works with one and I work with the other, but I have several times worked with therapists outside of my office. We just coordinate care. And when disclosure time comes, we either meet at their office or mine, usually wherever the partner is usually where we do it. And either the therapist will come to my office or I'll go to theirs, and we will plan out and do that disclosure. So we do that so both people have support and advocacy in that process of receiving that information or giving that information, because both are painful. And if you have therapists there, you're less likely to get gaslit, or for emotions to run off the chart. And if they do, the therapist can be there to run point, right? They can stop it. They can put a timeout. We can go for a walk. We can ask the addict to leave for a minute so we can debrief and reground. And there's all sorts of tools we use. So it doesn't turn into another one of those situations that I can just add to my list of traumas. We can actually make it productive and helpful. So that's what I would recommend. And in addition to that, I recommend that there's a third therapist involved whenever the couple's ready for couples therapy. That I know it sounds like a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but It's the three-legged stool for sure. It's your healing, it's the addict's healing, and it's the relationship healing. And all three of those need their own advocacy and help in order, for everybody to progress and to survive through this, and the relationship to survive.
Yeah, I agree with eventually the relationship needs its own separate therapist, and that may happen, before the disclosure, but there's a lot of preparation too. Like, let's say Kim is the betrayed partner's therapist. She's going to work through with the betrayed partner what that partner wants to know and how much detail and, I need to know who, what, all that kind of stuff. Because some partners want more information than others. And meanwhile, if I'm the cheater's therapist, I'm going to get that list of questions from Kim, and I'm going to relay them to the cheater through the therapists. And we're going to work on his or her answers to those questions. And I'm going to work with the cheater to get the language right. We're not going to be overly graphic. We're not going to use real names unless it's someone your partner knows, things like that. And then we'll facilitate the actual disclosure. And then we're going to plan for support for both of you in the immediate aftermath. You're probably not going to go home to the same house. One of you is going to stay with a friend or a family, all that kind of stuff. There's going to be some extra therapy sessions, and there's a lot of processing that day. I mean, it's not just reading, this is what I did. There's processing, and there's a chance to ask more questions usually. I mean, this is a big process, which takes us to our next question here, which I'm going to give to you, Kim. What about after disclosure? We had disclosure with the polygraph in December, and if this is from a third questioner, so a lot of interest in disclosure today. We had disclosure with the polygraph in December, and then had a session for me to share an impact letter at the end of February. I've been waiting for a response letter, which is frustrating. Is there a time frame for that?
Okay, that's interesting. It's an interesting question. So
maybe tell what an impact letter is and a response letter is too as part of this.
Okay, and I will say there's every therapist will do this just a little bit different. So I'm familiar with the impact letter, not familiar with the response letter. I usually have in disclosure, if I'm working with the addict, I have them write a letter that is given to the partner at the end of the disclosure session, which is really an taking full responsibility kind of letter. This is not about you, this is about me. I want you to know that all those times, blah, 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 whatever. So that's usually done that in my world, that's how we do it. But I would ask the therapist, I would be proactive about it. I think as I'm sitting here, it's kind of hard to put the impact letter out there and then feel like crickets. That would be difficult because there's vulnerability in that. So I would get with my therapist to communicate with his or hers or whoever that is and say, I need a response here. I need a letter of accountability or something, or at least acknowledgement in that to my impact letter. Now, the impact letter is something a partner writes to the addict expressing what this has done to them, the impact that it has had on their life, their feelings of trust, their financial status, whatever impact, and it details that to give to the addict.
And often it'll say, here's what I need from you.
Yes.
For them to move forward.
Yes, and you'll want to add that. An impact letter, you'll want to say, for safety or ongoing, I will need, no. Yes, and sometimes you'll know all that and sometimes you won't, but at least what you know in the moment, at least what you know at that time would be important. But in this case, to answer your question, I would definitely reach out and say, I need a, because this would be a need. I need a response here. What I'm hearing you saying is I feel frustrated, put myself out there and I'm getting nothing back.
Yeah.
And if in the disclosure, they should have the ability to do that. So.
Yeah, this time frame feels really slow to me. I mean, the full disclosure and polygraph in December, 2 full months later, we finally get the impact letter, and then it's 2 full months later and the addict hasn't responded. And acknowledged and agreed to do what's needed. That feels really slow to me. Like two weeks, yes, 2 months.
Yeah, that does feel like death by a thousand cuts there a little bit. Like you,
Yeah.
we try and pre-schedule all of those. So maybe, I'm sorry that didn't happen for you who was asking the question, but for any of you who are listening who may be considering disclosure, or looking forward to that, I would plan all those things. The disclosure, the reading the impact letter, the response letter, the polygraph. Like I would have those, I would have the help of my therapist help me schedule all those so that they are soon. You don't want to sit and, yeah, that would be very difficult.
And so you know when it's going to happen. I mean, the thing with trade partners who want disclosure, right? I want disclosure yesterday. So, because I can't move forward until I get it. And knowing that it's going to happen on July 12th, it's like, okay, I'm not happy about that, but it's going to happen on July 12th. I can live with that. And it's the same with impact letters and responses. As long as I know when it's going to happen, it makes it a lot easier. This indefinite thing is really just brutal.
So now your therapist, say, look, even if it's 3 months from now, I want something. I need something to help me to look forward to that, because I've been sitting in the unknown and being lied to and deceived for a long time. And, I at least need to know there's light at the end of this tunnel. You have every right to ask that, and I hope you do.
And every therapist has a different process with disclosure. We're not trying to bash your therapist.
Oh, not at all.
Be the normal process, but for me, it feels a little slow. Let's hop on to this next one. What about doing disclosure during the coronavirus virtual world?
Boy, this presents such a challenge, and you're speaking right to me because we're working through this at one day at a time. We have a directive in the office. We've decided not to do those virtually. I think there's not enough support in that. And if I were to back up just for a second, the reason why, when I'm working with a partner, for instance, there's at least 2 or 3 sessions specifically dedicated to planning out the disclosure. What I'll do before, during, after, who will be there to support me, what I'm going to eat that morning, how am I going to get sleep that night? I'm going to drive separately. Like I'm going to make sure there's so much planning involved, even for the partner. And having, and there's, the trauma can be pretty physical as well. And having just physical support, I think, is really important. So what we've decided to do for those couples who are willing to, or able to wait a couple months, we're scheduling those out. But we do have a few that we couldn't, so we have just taken precautions. Mask, 6 feet apart, but we are all there. We've done that a couple of times. So, and it depends on your state's rules and your therapist and what they will allow. I would recommend that a disclosure session happen in person. I think it could be really dysregulating for both not to have any support there for that.
Yeah, I agree. Disclosure is really, really emotionally and psychologically painful for both parties. And to be trapped in a house with the person who's giving you disclosure and not have the support of your individual therapist right there. I mean, it's just, I do have one person that told me he had done a full therapeutic disclosure in the office and it had gone well, but something had cropped up and he's like, oh crap. And he passed his polygraph, so he really didn't remember this thing, but he remembered it. So he talked to his therapist. He's like, I need to tell her. And they did, for that one thing that he had remembered, they did a virtual disclosure, even though they were stuck in the same house. And I got to talk to him a couple days after that had happened, and he said it was the first 24 hours were really rough. But then, she was glad that she knew and that he had come clean and did not blame the disclosure process for this not coming out because he had passed the polygraph. Another argument for the polygraph. It just popped up later. It's like, oh crap, I totally forgot I did this, which does happen, does it not?
I've had that happen a handful of times where they totally passed the polygraph and a month to 6 months later, they remember an event that they legitimately forgot. So yes, we will reconvene or find a way to disclose that information with the help of the therapist.
And, and again, having the therapist right there helps everybody process it. And if the betrayed partner is feeling like, why didn't you tell me this before? The therapist can explain the process of memory, hopefully, and how these things work sometimes.
Well, and being live, when I am there with either the partner or the addict, there are many times, one of the things that we do is give them permission to stop the disclosure at any time for any reason. And there are many times we will get up and take a walk around the building, go sit. We have a big fountain out downstairs. We'll go sit out there, just kind of reground. And I could not do that virtually. I could not physically, attend to those needs. And some of them are physical, not just emotional. So, waiting stinks. I would not want to do that, but I would do whatever I could to create an environment where we could do it in person.
And I think the therapists in those situations are hyper perceptive and always looking for, oh, we are out of the window of tolerance here, and
Yes.
can step in. And that's harder on a Zoom call than it is when you're in the room with somebody.
Yep.
You're in the room, you can see the whole body, you can tell if they're sweating, and you can sense an elevated heart rate, all that. You can't do it over Zoom.
That's right.
So, when is the best time to begin couples therapy?
That's a really good question.
Yesterday.
Well, I will tell you this, in the sex addiction world, and I know this isn't all about sex addiction, but in that particular case, we actually do not do it right away. We will do a small amount of couples therapy early on, just to set boundaries and ground rules for communication, and maybe to disclosure, some of the things that are just kind of like critical care, like an ER, like just to get things safe as we can get them in the relationship. But the deep emotional work required and the ability to be present and to be vulnerable, the things that are required for effective couples work usually takes time. Because if I'm an addict, I haven't been connecting with anything but myself and my behaviors that are, I have this pathological relationship with these behaviors, a self-soothing or fantasy or satiation or whatever it is I'm doing. And so that really, the addiction really has to be, there has to be some sobriety there. There has to be some understanding so that I can show up. Otherwise, the couple sessions become just pain, because it's just another reminder that even here with the therapist, I can't connect with my partner. So it's painful to wait, but it's usually kind of in the second half of the healing and recovery process for our couples. So don't rush couples therapy. The individual healing and recovery that you do will help. And you can do, like I said, some of those initial things, but the big, deep attachment work, reattachment work will happen on the backside.
Yeah, there are multiple really effective ways to help a couple, like emotionally focused therapy, and there's a couple others. I don't know what you guys use, but
that's what we use.
Yeah, and it does really require both parties to fully be there in the room, because otherwise that work will never happen if one of the people can't be fully present. And
for a partner, they could just be dysregulated with emotion. They could still be in trauma. They could still be, out of their window of tolerance. And that even will prohibit the ability to attach or to really even be present and hear what's going on. I've tried, individuals who have come in for counseling, couples counseling, and they're both in such a traumatic place. I don't know if they'd remember two things that were said that day. And so that's not useful. It's not helpful early on. And it's a hard thing, but good couples counselors, particularly EFT counselors, emotionally focused therapy is really the standard for couples therapy. They'll sense it right away. They'll sense if we're able to do that, or if we need to do some more individual stuff, or I need to give some directives to help people feel safe enough to show up in the room.
Yeah, and while the betrayed partner is in trauma, the addict is often still deep in denial. I was not able to be honest with myself for several months. And even after, for the first year, I was just having, sort of revelations. I was so deep in denial. I wasn't just lying to you, I was lying to myself, and I was believing my lies. And until I could work through some of that and get honest enough, I couldn't do anything else. I mean, that just had to be the one and only priority for me, was breaking through my denial and accepting reality.
Thank you for sharing that. I think shame too, not only denial, but shame shows up for both, but for the addict in such a way. I always say shame makes a me monster out of us. You know, like I become a me, everything's about me, what I'm feeling, what's this like for me. And that makes me unavailable when I'm on me planet. It makes me unavailable to somebody else. So, you know, the partner starts to cry maybe and says, you know, I can't believe you did this. And how could you do that? I don't know, whatever. And if the addict's heavy into shame, they're going to immediately go out of their tolerance, their ability to tolerate her emotion or his emotion. And they're just going to feel like, and then the partner will just feel abandoned again. So the cycle continues. So we want to make sure that some of that stuff, at least there's some awareness and some ability to arrest that and call myself out. Like Scott was saying, like understand, oh, I'm into my shame right now, or I'm in denial, or can you stop for a second? Because all I'm hearing is I suck. So can we, can we stop this session so I can recalibrate? Yeah. So it takes some amount of personal insight for couples work to work.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. That's the point I was trying to make. You hit it. Thank you.
We're on the same page.
I almost got there. I think we have time for one more question, and I love this one. I first discovered my husband's addictive behavior 7 years ago. I thought we had done adequate individual work, but we never had a formal disclosure. It's obvious that we didn't do enough. Is it worth doing a formal disclosure 7 years later?
I would say the short answer is yes. Yes. The caveat to that is the disclosure is really only helpful if both people really, really want to save the relationship. If they're still invested. I'm not saying that perfectly. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that we're not really on our way out of the relationship. If we still are working at it and we still have hope for the relationship, I would say absolutely 100% the disclosure would be helpful, with the help and all of the background help that we've been talking about with disclosures. It gives 7 more years of information, between the last time you found out. So there may be, but I find that the disclosure covers like the whole spectrum, like the whole sexual history. So I think that would still be relevant, even
things that happened before you met are usually come out in a disclosure, because the betrayed partner wants to know, oh, I didn't cause this. You were doing this long before you met me.
Right, because sometimes the partner takes on some shame too about that, like, oh, is this because I nagged, or is this because I blah, blah, blah? And really, it has nothing to do with that. You'll see tenets of those behaviors, and oftentimes in very young ages, maybe not fully developed, but for instance, if an addict gets caught doing some type of voyeuristic behavior, oftentimes you will see things in their young adult or childhood or adolescence that, they were experimenting with some of that. So it helps alleviate some of the shame for the partner. This really isn't about me. This is something that was developing and in the works long before we were together as a couple.
And we also get to learn things about our partners that we didn't know, like if there was sexual abuse. Sometimes we don't even know that our partner was sexually abused as a child. And, and this could apply to our same-sex couple earlier, but I was going to give this with the heterosexual man who acts out with men. A lot of times that's related to the addiction and the escalation of the addiction and the taboo, but sometimes it's related to childhood abuse. They're acting out with men, they're reenacting childhood abuse in an attempt to take control of it. I mean, that's a whole humongous subject that we don't have time to get into. But it could be a lot of different things, and we get to learn that and have some empathy.
Right. Thank you for that. And I'm thinking too, I don't know what the recovery and the healing has looked like for you in the 7 years, but this might deepen the connection. This might deepen you know, anytime we're honest, I say wherever there's honesty and transparency and vulnerability, you're going to have intimacy. There's going to be intimacy. There's going to be connection. Even if it's hard information, at least now I know the truth. So that's one thing to consider, is it might actually be another opportunity to create and increase the connection between you and your partner, if they're willing to do that.
Yeah, disclosure, it's not for sissies. It's for people who want, it's not for people who want their relationship to survive. It's for people who want their relationship to thrive, who want it to be better than ever. And I know so many couples, and I know Kim does too, whose relationships after the infidelity and all of the pain of healing and disclosure and rebuilding trust, they think, oh my God, this is the relationship I always wanted and never had. And I think, you know, doing a disclosure 7 years later might bump you into that. You know, I hope so.
It does. I think deep down, we all want to be who we are. We all want to be able to show up in the relationship and be vulnerable and feel wanted and loved, and feel like we can trust that person with our soul, with our heart, with our dreams, with our, you know, we want that. We yearn for that. That we're wired for that. So I have seen that in many couples when they finally, when all of the mess in the middle, all the stuff that happens is all outed. And now we know it all, like we know, good, bad, and ugly, all of it. We know it all. Now the possibility of connection is real, because there is no secret. There are no lies. There's no walls to prohibit us from connection. And sometimes we have to heal with that information. I mean, the information is, you know, painful to hear, oftentimes, but if we'll go through that experience, there's a certain amount of trust that can be built there, because why would somebody put themselves through that if they didn't really want connection? I agree with Scott. I think it's very heroic to show up that way, and courageous to both be the receiver and the giver of that information, and be willing to sit in that kind of, and put yourself through that is pretty powerful. But it does create the ability for most couples. It does. Now we've cleared the road. We've kind of cleared the mess, and now we can kind of find our way back to each other if that's what we want.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I loved doing the Q&A the whole time. That was kind of awesome. So, Kim will be back in 2 weeks. Next week, you'll have Matt Wheeler and myself. So we hope to see you then. Anything you want to say to take us out, Kim?
Thank you guys so much for your questions and for engaging. Please come back in a couple of weeks. I would love to answer more questions. Sometimes think them up before you come. And hopefully, I mean, I don't know everything by any means, but I am happy to give what I have and what I know. Matt is a colleague and a good friend and my neighbor next door in my office. He's amazing as well. So please show up to his webinar, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.